Kia ora, nā mai ki te whare. Welcome to The House, ko Louis Collins aho. The financial scrutiny cycle is something that is pretty much ongoing at Parliament. Whether it's on past, current or future spending, there are a number of processes that the government is required to fulfil. Among them, the big one is the budget, and more specifically, Budget Day. Before that though,
The House comes to the debate on the Budget Policy Statement 2025 and Half-Year Economic and Fiscal Update 2024.
the Budget Policy Statement sets out the government's fiscal strategy for the upcoming budget and sets a bit of context for the decisions being made around what gets funding and why. The half-year economic and fiscal update relates to the current spending and contains Treasury's observation of the economy and the effect that government policy is having on it. Both documents are examined and scrutinised by the Finance and Expenditure Committee, who report back to the House within 40 working days. The first Wednesday after that, which is this week, the House has a debate on those two documents. Here's Finance and Expenditure Committee Chair Cameron Brewer.
The Budget Policy Statement released in December set out 4 priorities for Budget 2025. They are, number 1, lifting economic growth through measures to address New Zealand's long-term productivity challenges. Number 2, implementing a social investment approach to drive better results from the government's investment in social services and thereby improve life outcomes for people with high needs. Number 3, keeping tight control of government spending while funding a limited number of high-priority government policy commitments and cost pressures that cannot be met by reprioritisation. And number 4, developing a sustainable pipeline of long-term infrastructure investments.
Finance Minister Nicola Willis has forecasted the upcoming budget as something that focuses on National's favourite word right now, growth. Brewer used that classic politician call-and-response technique to introduce a new word to the government's economic lexicon.
Mr. Speaker, as well as growth, this coalition government is focused on trade. So we've got growth, and trade.
First to respond from the opposition was Labour's Megan Woods, who promised the Speaker to keep her speech free from call-and-response repetition.
I didn't want to interrupt the member's speech, but let me just say that the sort of general supporting commentary from around his colleagues is not going to be too much more tolerated. This is a parliament, not a revivalist tent. The Honourable Dr. Megan Woods.
Rather than seeing a narrative of growth, as the opposition will tell us, it is nothing more than a pretty grim read in cuts. But one of the important things that a budget policy statement sets out, Mr. Speaker, is the operating allowance. This is how much money that a government is going to have to allocate at the forthcoming budget, what that looks like. And we can see in the government's own budget policy statement that we have on page 3 of that document that there's going to be a high bar for new initiatives. And I think when we say a high bar, I think we say an insurmountable bar. So while there's an operating allowance in the forthcoming budget of $2.4 billion, after you take out the pre-commitments that have already been made, that is things that the government didn't fund in the last budget and realised that they needed to do some political fix-ups on in between budgets, we're left with an operating allowance of $700 million. And Mr. Speaker, I cannot emphasise to New Zealanders how low that is. That is for everything other than health.
Next to speak was Greens co-leader Chloe Swarbrick, who questioned what kind of growth the government was actually referring to.
And the reality that is biting everyday New Zealanders as a result of the decisions that this government has made to knowingly, in its going for growth strategy, grow inequality, grow child poverty, grow climate changing emissions, and actually degrow the well-being of New Zealanders.
While most of the debate focused on the budget policy statement, ACT's Todd Stevenson figured it was worth mentioning the other document too.
Actually, in the half-year economic and fiscal update, which we also are debating, which is this sizable document, but it's actually a very valuable and important document, and it's worth actually bringing to the House's attention some pieces of this, because it is actually really interesting. You can actually see when the previous government was in place, the massive uptick in government spending, and then the horrific increase in inflation, which has really made all New Zealand households suffer.
The economy certainly has seen better days, but among all the doom and gloom, sometimes it's good to remember that we have been in recessions before. The Greens' Julianne Genter suggested that the government was taking its fiscal inspiration from one of those recessions of old, the one in the 1990s.
This budget policy statement is the same old tired talking points that I've heard from national governments for way too long. It harks right back to the 1990s, absolutely failed neoliberal concept of what the economy is and how we make progress.
As well as grunge, boy bands and austerity budgets, the 90s also saw the creation of the RMA. Nationals' Ryan Hamilton said reforming it was also key to growing the economy.
So, Mr Speaker, I'm pleased that we are reforming the RMA. Obviously, we've got some fast-track legislation which is now in train, and some hearing panels will be set up and enable those things to get on and do it. The great thing about them is they're time consent bound. So regional councils and consenting authorities can't keep kicking the can down the road. Developers want to get on and do it.
In what was a trend for the opposition, the government's constant utterance of growth was questioned by Labour's Deborah Russell.
So the government has said that it has 4 policy areas that it's going to focus on in Budget 2025. And the first of those, it says it's going to lift economic growth through measures to address New Zealand's long-term productivity challenges. Well, they seem to think they can do it just by saying the words growth, 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 growth. But let me unpack what needs to be done in order to get growth up. It means we need ordinary people with well-paid jobs. It means we need scientists creating the innovative research that takes New Zealand forward. It means we need people getting good quality education.
This debate is sort of a teaser of what we can expect during the budget debate. It gives the public the chance to see what the government is likely to loosen its purse strings for, and based off Wednesday's debate, the public will likely be expecting something quite frugal. As the last speaker, Nationals' Dan Bidwar took it upon himself to perhaps soften the blow come May 22nd.
I wish to speak directly to Kiwi voters. In the backdrop of the budget policy statement, we know times have been tough. Unemployment is rising, people are still struggling with the cost of living, and we're dealing with the worst recession since the early 1990s. We are in a mess, Mr Speaker. But who caused this mess? It was the last Labour government. They are the ones that doubled our debt, Mr Speaker, that had wasteful spending on projects like Kiwi Build, Light Rail, Skypath, Three Waters, Health New Zealand, Tipu Kinga, and the highest crime rates in a generation. So, Mr Speaker, we're in a mess, but we take responsibility for getting us out of it.
I te whakarongo koe ki te whare. You've been listening to The House, a program made with funding from Parliament's Office of the Clerk. Mā te wā.